Hello, I'm Morgan Pehme, Editor-in-Chief of City and State, and this is Last Look. Today our guest is Bob Lieber. He's the former New York City Deputy Mayor for Economic Development, and now he's the chair of the New York District Council for the Urban Land Institute. Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Morgan. Thank you.
So tell us about the work of the Urban Land Institute.
The Urban Land Institute is the largest real estate not-for-profit really globally, with more than 30,000 members around the world. And the mission of ULI, simply said, is the develop and promote the responsible use of land. We have a finite amount of land, and how we properly use that land to enforce or to reinforce the growth and the health of communities around the world is what ULI really focuses on.
So specifically in terms of New York State or New York City, what are the organization's goals for 2014?
Well, I think for us at the district council level here, it's to really represent, broadly speaking, the real estate industry as it relates to major land use policy decisions that are being made, not just here in the city, but also in the state and at the regional level. There are lots of issues that affect how land use and real estate development and transportation go together, but what are best practices around clean air, power, transportation, reclaiming land, density? Where are you going to put the growth? How are we going to be able to attract and retain jobs? How are we going to be able to accommodate a projected growth in the population in New York by over 1 million people, and in the region in the next several decades of perhaps 10 million people? How do we do it, and how do we make sure that the decisions that we make today are long-lasting and in the best interest of our children and our grandchildren?
We've heard a lot here at the end of the Bloomberg administration about how Mayor Bloomberg really terraformed the city and how much development, how the whole face of the city is different. How does the work of ULI either dovetail or diverge from your work with Mayor Bloomberg?
Well, I think the Plan YC and the goals outlined in Plan YC in terms of developing a business plan or a strategy about how you're going to accommodate growth makes a lot of sense. And there are things that government can do to promote that kind of growth, but there are also things that the private sector is going to be responsible for to be able to execute upon that growth. So I think the two go hand in glove to a certain extent. What the Urban Land Institute is a reflection of the broader real estate industry. So we have major landowners, major developers, major investors, major financiers, as well as major designers, architects, land use consultants, who all come together to try and share best practices about what are the ways to tackle the problems that these communities face as we go forward. And for us at the District Council, it's to be, how do we continue to create content that addresses these needs head on? And how do we create value and enhance the value proposition to our members and the impact that the real estate community can have on local land use decisions here in the New York region?
So what would be a specific example of the type of content that you create?
Well, I think one of the best examples that we have that's recent is the East Midtown rezoning initiative that the mayor's office put together around trying to re-densify the Park Avenue corridor, broadly speaking, so that we can maintain as competitive a physical environment for companies and people to choose to locate, not just in the next 5 years, but 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. The building stock that exists there are buildings that were built largely in the 60s and the 70s, so 50 some odd years. It's become outdated. What are the types of things that we can do to continue to reinvent ourselves? And ULI's role in that was as a convener to bring together public elected officials, city planning officials, land use planners, developers, financiers, et cetera, in a room in a convening way that brings together people who may have different views and creates a forum where there can be an open exchange of those views and a better appreciation for what one side versus another is trying to accomplish and what any kind of weaknesses of that might be. So for us, being supporters and advocates for improving New York's competitiveness long term is important, and being able to bring people together in a forum where they can have an open exchange of ideas without it being contentious, I think helps facilitate the conversation and ends up with better policies that come out of it.
as deputy mayor, you helped oversee the redevelopment of Willets Point, of Coney Island, and you also had some frustrations like with the Kingsbridge Armory. And I was wondering, like, what was your takeaway from being deputy mayor and also head of EDC for best practices that you would impart to the next administration, and also stumbling blocks to be wary of?
Well, one of the things that became pretty evident to me very early on when I started working in the city is how much distrust exists between public officials and private sector participants. They don't really understand the language that they speak, and they certainly question the motivations of each party, whether they be disparaging or whether they be ego or whether they be greedy developers, what have you. There's just a real lack of understanding of what is important. And I think through a conversation and a dialogue, again, you can at least, you may not agree, and the issue is not necessarily to agree, but it's to have some appreciation for what the other side is thinking about. So I thought one of the best things I learned about was, and it wasn't always easy, but sitting through community board hearings at Wednesday night from 9 to midnight with a kind of a self-selected group of people who want to extol their views, and you get to listen to them, actually is a really healthy part of the process. So coming away with a better appreciation for what the impact or the effect of the decisions that you might be making might be, helps you come up with a better process and a better outcome that comes out of it. So I saw, not just in the community boards, but also with the public, the appointees and electeds, to be able to listen to them and understand what they care about, and to bring the private sector together so they could have an open exchange of views, gives each side a better appreciation for what they want to try and accomplish. And in isolation and in silo, there's all this festering of misunderstanding, which breeds mistrust.
Do you think that even in a project that fails, like what you were trying to do with Kingsbridge Armory, now we see that it has found a tenant, that it will have a transformation after several years of kind of an impasse? And you talked about the Midtown rezoning, and Councilman Garodnick has indicated that he is open to revisiting it. So is Mayor-elect de Blasio. Can a project failing still spur, perhaps an even better outcome in the future sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. So it's not just about any one project at any one point in time. There are really no new ideas. It's about when preparation and opportunity come together, which makes things happen. In Kingsbridge, there was an example where, let me back up. In any one of these projects, you need to have advocates, right? You need to have parties that represent different interests to be in a room to be able to try and build some consensus and some compromise. What happened in Kingsbridge in the earlier version is that the sponsorship or the representation from the community and the electeds drifted back and forth. So at the time the final decision was being made, there was no real advocate on the other side with whom you could try and negotiate some kind of a compromise. So that project, I think, has come to a successful conclusion now. It's been rethought and re-engineered, and I think it's going to be very successful. At least I hope it's going to be. And we'll see, right? So that's kind of when the timing worked and didn't work with things that were going on with the local elected officials in that part of the Bronx and the Bronx in general. I think with Councilman Garodnick and Mayor-elect de Blasio being supportive of what we're going to do with Midtown, I think gives the impetus to people to say, let's figure out how to get this done. No is not the answer. Let's find a way to get to yes. And I think that dialogue and that engagement is important. If you're not engaged with someone on the other side, even if you don't agree with them, it's going to be very hard to ever get to a point where you can get something done.
Mayor Bloomberg came from the private sector into government. So did you. You worked for Lehman Brothers. Did you, what was that experience like of transitioning from the private to the public sector, and what kind of lessons did you take from that move?
Well, I think that the private sector culture is one of a survival culture, right? You need to constantly be learning, and you need to be changing and evolving if you're going to remain competitive. So you need to constantly be looking for best practices and adapt and change your style and your goals if you're going to be successful. The public sector doesn't have some of the same metrics that the private sector does. Now, to a certain extent, that's better because you're not driven by the same short-term motivations that oftentimes will drive decisions in the private sector. But on the other hand, the public sector won't adopt new, better practices necessarily. Why? Well, because they don't have to. So part of what I saw the opportunity, there was some very easy, low-hanging fruit in terms of how to run a process, in the terms of a sale of an asset, of an RFP, lots of different things that I saw very early on when I started at EDC, which would be kind of real estate 101 in the private sector, but it hadn't really evolved yet into the public sector, even with a progressive and more modern type approach that EDC typically has.
And why do you think that is?
Because I don't think there's any pressure to get things done. And I think what Mike Bloomberg was able to do is to create urgency in people that said, don't put off to tomorrow what you can do today. Get it done today. The clock, the damn clock that was in the bullpen all the time with the countdown clock, make something happen, really is a powerful inspiration for people to get things done, right? So you have to be goal oriented, and you have to be able to set metrics about how you're going to get there if you actually want to get anything done. And one of the tricks to doing this in the public sector was when you had a meeting internally, you made sure you didn't leave that meeting without having specific tasks, specific assignments, and a specific date when you're going to reconvene and answer the questions. If you just got up and said, okay, and then went on, in the private sector, you might have more kind of progress and initiative to get things done, but the difference is in the public sector, it's more inertia. So you have to keep a very short kind of leash on it to try and make sure you can continue to make progress.
The cover story in this issue of City and State are recollections and reflections from members of the Bloomberg administration who work closely with the mayor. Do you have any specific reflections upon the administration, or can you contextualize what you think is the legacy of Mike Bloomberg?
Well, I think the great thing about the mayor is that he hires great people and gives them the rope and the kind of the authority to go do what they think is the right thing to do. Keep him posted, keep him plugged in, major initiatives, keep him posted, but he's very, very supportive of pushing the envelope and trying things different. And he was going to do things because he thought they were the right things to do, not because it was particularly politically expedient to do so at the time. So I thought that was really reassuring, and he's got your back, right? So if you take risks or something doesn't go right, or you make a mistake, he's the first one to stand up and defend you. And that's very empowering, because oftentimes you'll see people take the knees out of people who try and do things and make a difference. And if you do that, no one's ever going to try. So he really encouraged and created an environment that gave people the room to try. And I think you can look at a number of the commissioners and deputy mayors that he's had to just see that in full force. You've got a good idea, let's give it a try. It's not why, it's why not. Let's try it, let's see what happens. Are we making a better impact on the future for the citizens of the city? And he was very supportive of that.
Bob Lieber, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Morgan.
And that's it for this episode of Last Look. For more episodes, please join us on the web at cityandstateny.com.